This video is about selecting and organizing sounds for improvised live performance on synthesizers, samplers, and drum machines. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. And if you're not, welcome. My name is Eric and I currently make and perform music under the name Circo. I've been releasing all sorts of electronic music and performing internationally as a DJ for the past 15 plus years. Over the past few years, I decided to combine my love of music production and music performance into an improvisational live show. Over the course of doing that, I have learned a ton of stuff and made a ton of mistakes. In these Friday tutorials, I try to share what I have learned and what I know in a way that I wish someone had been there to show me. My goal is to inspire ideas that may help you realize your music dreams by showing you what I do and how I do it, and explaining a little bit about the why behind it. So first, just a little bit about how I play live. And this is really about improvisation versus pre-planning for live performance. The way I perform kind of grew out of my years of DJ experience. The way I used to DJ and the way I still DJ when I do my DJ shows is I would pull a crate of music that I may or may not play that evening, and that's just kind of like what I would work from. And then over the course of the night, depending on how the crowd was and how the vibe was in the room and what it kind of felt like people needed out of the music and out of the ambiance, I would use what I had, those tools that were there, to kind of create a musical journey for the whole evening for the people who were there. Now, this differs from the way that a lot of people DJ. A lot of people will pre-plan out exactly what they're going to play, song after song, even sometimes the order of the song and the way that they're going to transition. And they do that performance no matter how things are going in the show. That's the performance they plan to do, and that's the way that they're going to do it. Now, it's not saying that one way is better than the other, and both can end up in an absolutely amazing night and a fun night and, a great time for the people that are on the dance floor. I just prefer the excitement and the fun of feeding off of the vibe and the energy of the crowd to help dictate what's coming next and where we go with the rest of the evening. So we're kind of in it together. We're creating the atmosphere and the vibe of the night together. And when I decided to make the transition to performing live, I wanted to keep that spontaneity and that kind of collaborative energy going through my live sets. I didn't want to plan something out, with a bunch of stems in Ableton that I launched one after the other and then just messed around with some effects in order to do my live show. What I wanted to be able to do was take that love of production and that energy that I get from the crowd and use that to actually live produce something that's never been played before that night and will never be played again. It's entirely unique and it's entirely just that moment in time. If I were just going to launch clips and, play something that was already pre-recorded and all of that stuff and just use effects, I would actually much prefer to DJ that show than to do that and call it a live set. Now, all of that said, that's the background for what we're going to talk about today, because at the core of everything are sounds. Now, sounds in the way that I perform live are kind of like the paints that I use to paint a picture. And this sound selection and sound organization, I look at kind of like the way a painter would put the paint on their palette before they started to do their painting. And that was going to be the colors that they would use, and they can blend those together and mix them in different ways and use them in different ways on the canvas in order to create a different piece of art from what they have laid out as their kind of base structure. And that's the way that I look at sound. Sounds are kind of the colors that I paint with, and it's improvisational. And I was like to compare this to Bob Ross, the painter, and he would always talk about painting the happy little trees, and it was always kind of like, oh, well, one should go here, and it feels like this, and oops, I made a mistake, I'm going to turn it into a tree. So those happy little accidents are the same kind of happy little accidents that I love to use to inspire and motivate my sets. So I like to set up my sounds and create live in a way that encourages those happy accidents, and then they can help dictate, with the crowd and the energy and what I'm feeling and ideas that I get while I'm performing. They're going to dictate what music comes out over the course of that hour or 2 hours or 3 hours that I'm performing. So because of all this, the sounds that I choose and the way that I organize them to kind of call back during a performance are super, super important. And so that's what we're going to talk about today: selecting and organizing sounds for improvised live performance. All right, so first let's talk about selecting and designing sounds. So for me, first and foremost, I have to start from the point of I'm going to use this sound to perform later. So I try to choose sounds that are dynamic and they have lots of harmonics and a lot of noise and things like that are going to make them more playable later on. Just to give you an example, like if we were talking about a sound like this, like a bass sound, I want something that later on, as I'm playing, I can do some more dynamic things with. So to give you an idea, that would be a bass sound that for me would have something that has a lot of harmonic content and something that would be much more interesting and much more playable. Once I have a sound that I like and that I think has a lot of harmonic content in it, what I would do then is I would take that sound and sculpt it so that I only have the frequencies that it needs in order to be the sound that it is. So again, going back to this bass sound, I might take this and using the bandwidth filter, take out the low lows so that it wouldn't conflict with other sounds, and take out the highs and the high mids. So I still have the central content of the sound that I can then use and change and play later on, but it's not going to be sloppy and taking up a bunch of the frequency range of everything else and then overlapping with things and having things sound messy. So when speaking of sounds that are percussive, like sounds like these, for example, when I'm putting together sounds like this, I try to pick sounds that are in kind of high, mid, or low frequency ranges. So for example, this sound that's here, or this clap, those are in kind of the high mid range. This is kind of in the low mid range. This is also in the low mid range, but even lower. So the idea being that in any given group of sounds, there's not anything that's competing too much for the same frequencies that are going to make things sloppy. When I'm selecting sounds like the bass sound that we were talking about here, I try to select bass sounds that are in the low mid range rather than really low subby basses, because a lot of the drums that I choose, a lot of the kicks that I choose will have a low rumble in it, and I don't want the sub from that interfering with the rumble in the bass, or if I do have a sub that I'm using, I don't want them to compete. So a lot of the basses tend to be like this one, which is more of that kind of low mid range rather than a low subby bass in the bass parts. I try to do the same with all of the other melodic elements as well. So you'll notice in the 4 sounds that we have going here, and I'll talk a little bit later about how these are organized, but you'll notice that there is this kind of low mid bass, then we have a low frequency in the percussive sounds, mid, and a high mid. So all of those sounds would play well together in the frequency range, so they're not going to be all kind of overlapping and competing. Now again, as I mentioned before, these sounds and the way that I have them, they aren't designed to necessarily play a specific track. They're all designed to kind of play together and not overlap together. So whichever I choose, whichever sounds I decide to mix and match together, they will go together in that particular combination, whichever one I decide to come up with. Here on the black box, I have a bunch of different kind of background drone sounds, atmospheric sounds. So let's just randomly take one of these here. So you can see these are designed to go in the background and add kind of a foundation to the music that I'm doing. Now, I don't know what I'm going to put them with, so I need to have a certain amount of control over them, and that's why the one control that I have besides volume that's mapped for each one of the different pads on the black box is a high pass and low pass filter. So if I need this to be in the higher frequency ranges, I'm going to high pass, and I'm going to take out the low frequencies that might be competing with something else. Or if there aren't many low frequencies and I don't want it to compete with the high frequencies and I want it to be that low kind of foundation, I can low pass with that same sound and anywhere in between. So as I'm performing, I can fine tune that to fit into whatever area goes best with the other songs that we're playing. And finally, in this kind of sound palette that I have here is the swarm, the quadranted swarm, which is up here on top. This is the most difficult to place within everything, but it's also the most flexible as far as its placement within everything. So if I was to go ahead and get this started and put in a couple of triggers. So the swarm has two different filters, so I can do that same kind of filtering like what I was doing with the black box. So one of these filters can be either high pass or low pass. So if I wanted it to be high pass, I can take out the lower content, or if I want a low pass, I can take out the higher content to allow it to fit better into what I'm doing at the moment. Then there's also a master tuning for the whole thing, and I can place that really anywhere. So again, depending on what other sounds I'm using, I can make this fit within those sounds because it is very, very flexible using the two filters, this one being a high pass or a low pass, this one being just a low pass. So you can make it kind of a band pass filter and really place it in the mix exactly where you want it to go. And that's one of the reasons why I chose the swarm to add into this for kind of an improvisational element in my sets, is because it is so flexible and it is so able to fit in anywhere that I need it to fit within a mix. So now what I want to talk about a little bit is how I organize the sounds. Now for me, getting these sounds organized and kind of placed and ready to be used is kind of like a band tuning the guitar and tuning the bass, tuning the drums, tuning the keyboards or synthesizers that they're going to use if they're analog, and getting them ready to play so that they know exactly kind of where they're starting from. So the way this is really organized here is the left side of the setup is everything that is drums is in the digitact, and that's coming into inputs A and B. And then everything that is melodic is routed through the digatone and is coming into C and D here in the octatrack. So the swarm and the black box through the big sky are routed into the digatone, and then that's routed then into here. So I have the ability to separate out melodic elements from drum elements. Now that said, within the drum elements, the way I organize these is I don't organize it into patterns and songs and things like that and then build from there. Because my set is improvisational, I'm using these instruments just a little bit differently. So for example, a pattern within the digitact not only stores triggers and notes within the sequencer, but it also stores sample selection for that track. And so what I treat this as is basically each pattern isn't a song or a piece of a song. Each pattern is a drum kit for me. So if I go to pattern 9, and then we get things started here, I've got a kick on pattern 9. But if I then go to pattern 10 and push the kick, it's a different kick. And I always put a kick on track 1. If I go to 11, it's a different kick. If I go to 12, it's a different kick. So you get the idea. Each pattern isn't a song. It's a different group of sounds that I can then use, and I can mix and match those sounds with anything else that I'm playing here. Now, in order to keep the organization in a way that is usable and that I can call back on while I'm performing, I try to keep things in similar positions within the machines. So I put in some triggers in here so you could hear what each thing was. So for example, if we were here, let's go back to pattern 10. So if we were in pattern 10, we have a kick on 1 always, but it's not always the same kick. There's always a snare or a clap on 2, but it's not always the same snare or clap. You know, for example, if we were to switch patterns, we have a kick still on 1 and a different clap on 2. And in this case, it's a snare, right? So in each case, they're the same type of instrument, but different sounds within that space. 3 and 4 are always percussive elements of one way or another. 5 is always kind of a background element of some sort of a also percussive, but a little bit wider sound, less punchy of a sound. 6 is always a closed hi-hat, different ones in every group of sounds. 7 is always an open hi-hat, different in every set of sounds as well. And 8 is always a kind of a random sound element. I use that for whatever kind of I feel like throwing in there. So you can hear that those are all organized in such a way so that I can recall them no matter which group I'm in. Now within this, I organize the patterns from lower to higher intensity within the style of music that I'm playing. So if I'm going to be starting off earlier in the night and I want it to be mellower, I'll use lower numbered drum kits because I know those sounds lend themselves more to that. As things build, I will build more through those kits to the sounds that are more dynamic and more aggressive. And if I need a break or if I want to bring down the energy a little bit, I can move back down. And so it allows me a lot of flexibility and freedom within the improvisational set. So that's basically how I have the drum set up. Over on this side with the Digatone, with the 4 tracks here, I also have them set up the patterns the same way that they are in the Digitact, meaning that each pattern is not a song. Each pattern is a group of 4 sounds that sound good together if I choose to use any combination of them. And I kind of have this personal rule for myself that in order to not over clutter things, I will never use more than 2 of them at the same time together because I don't want the mix to get too messy as I'm playing. But if I was playing along with this and I wanted to bring in a bass, which is always on track 1, I have a bass sound on track 1. I have a lower, still percussive because of the style of music that I play, but more tonal percussive sound on 2. Another more tonal percussive sound on 3, and a very high tonal percussive sound on 4. Now I know, because of the way that I've set this up, I also set each one of the patterns to be in the same key. So I know that whichever combination of those I play together, they'll play in key if they have a key. Some of them are percussive and don't necessarily have a tone. So if I was to play the bass with the higher percussive sound, know they would go together. Or if I was to play the two middle percussive sounds, or the higher one with one of those, they would be in the same key. So it allows me to mix and match and bring in whatever I feel like sounds like it should be within that moment. The sounds that are in the black box, as I mentioned before, they're more kind of ambient sounds and drone sounds. They're basically one of three things. It's either an atmospheric sound like a drone or some sort of background noise, or it is a loop of something that is kind of, I call them the interesting loops, something that adds interest to the sound or to the song without it being too much the song itself. And then the final thing that I use this for is for vocals. And the reason why it's those three things that I would use within this box is because this can time stretch samples so that it will play them kind of like launching clips in Ableton. You can launch a long sample and it will play in time and it will loop in time. So I have these set up to launch like that. I don't sequence the samples in here. You can, but it's not something that I do with this just because of the way I use this. I use these as kind of background foundation sounds. So with that said, these background sounds also go through the Big Sky, and it's the only instrument that's going through this, and that's because those kind of background ambient sounds, I often want to add a reverb to them in order to kind of push them to the back of the mix and wash them out a bit, because they're the ones that kind of fill in the foundation of the track rather than coming to the front and being the sound that you hear. So a sound like this one, this is the sound by itself, but I can wash it with reverb and then I can filter it and I can place it in the mix wherever I want, farther back with more reverb, more to the front with less reverb, lower frequencies or higher frequencies within that same kind of drone sound in the background. And then finally, spoke a little bit about the quadranted swarm, and the idea is that this is an improvisational melodic loop sounding thing. I use the internal sequence in here. It's not being sequenced by anything else. Nothing is sequencing anything else in this setup. Every machine is doing its own thing because I like these sequencers and the way they work. And this one, I like it to be very immediate and easy to switch and really changeable, really modifiable within the set. All right, so now that we've kind of heard each individual piece and part and talked a little bit about how they're used and why I put them together like that, let's see just a little bit real quickly how they all work together and come together in kind of an improvisational way. If you have any questions about any of the stuff that we went over today, please feel free to post those down in the comments, and I really do my best to try and answer every question as best I can. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to help maybe point you in the direction of somebody who's more of an expert than I am and who knows something a bit better about the topic, but I'm happy to help as much as I can. And if you got something positive out of this video, give it a thumbs up, give it a like. And if you'd like to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe down below and hit the little bell, and that'll notify you each time I do a video. And don't forget, if you're considering getting any of the gear that you saw here today or any other gear, there are affiliate links down in the description below. And if you click on those and then you do decide to get something, it does help support the channel and it doesn't cost anything extra for you. So thank you so much for watching, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care of each other.